If you want to get rid of all the ads, just choose the David McWilliams Plus option on Apple Podcasts, and you'll hear us without any clutter or noise or ads. Lovely, John.
Beautiful.
To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is time for the podcast, but before we talk about economics and surpluses and budgets and all that sort of stuff, John,
All that good stuff, man.
I want to give a shout out to Eamon and Rachel Quinn from Mullaghbawn in Armagh.
Right.
I met Rachel in Vancouver. They are big fans.
Oh,
Apparently
really?
Eamon's got some very long drive and he's bored, so he listens to us. So he gets less bored.
Good man, Eamon
Eamon
and
and Rachel Quinn from Mullaghbawn in Armagh via Vancouver.
Big shout out.
Big shout out. I know you're miles away over there on the west coast of the United States, but lovely to have you.
Fantastic,
And great to have you listen to us over there. How are you, Ed? What's on your mind?
I'm in good form. I'm in very good form. What's on my mind? Been loads of stuff happening since you were in.
I go away and then you get all confused.
Turn your back for 2 minutes and all sorts of things happen. So there's a couple of things I do want to ask you about. And I do want to ask you about this 12 billion that has cropped up in our bank account, our collective country bank account.
Yes.
But before I ask you about that, and it's kind of related as well, is story I've been kind of looking at and following over the last week or so is the story about Apple, the big tech company moving into banking.
Yeah,
And
it's a big story.
Yeah, it is a big story. Is this another tech company drifting out of its lane, or is this a tech company developing a whole new banking system? But the key question, though, is they are offering something in the region of 4.15% interest on savings.
Yeah.
How can they do that when the Main Street banks are less than 1%?
All right, we're going to talk about, this podcast is going to be called The Paradox of Prudence, right? This is the name of this podcast, right? But to answer your question, John, about Apple, right? The reason that Apple can offer 4.2%. So what Apple are doing is they've done a joint venture with Goldman Sachs, right? Goldman Sachs have a banking license in the United States. So what Apple are doing is they're saying, we'll give you 4.2%. You say, are they able to do this? Because they make money elsewhere. Apple make more money than any bank in the world. Yeah. So what Apple are doing is they're subsidizing. So the reason the banks can only offer
their own money.
Well, this is just wait a second, right? The reasons the banks can only offer 1% on interest is the margin that a bank makes, right? Is the difference between the interest it charges, right, and the interest it pays. And that's got to do with its cost base, right? Apple's cost base to income ratio is totally different, right? Because they have huge amounts of income. So what they're doing is they're starting a bank with no costs, right?
Right.
So therefore they can basically take your money at 4%, put it on deposit in Goldman Sachs. They put it on deposit in the Fed.
Okay.
Right? They have no cost base because they have no bank. So the reason that they can do this is that they are cross-subsidizing all their other various different businesses into the banking business. They will suck in huge amounts of deposits because you're going to get paid probably 4 times more with Apple than they would do. And that's how they're going to hoover up deposits. So basically what they're doing is they're basically saying, we are now going to become a bank.
Yeah.
Right? Now, Apple Pay gave them, I would say, the incentive. So they started Apple Pay in 2013. And initially the take-up was very, very small. Now, if you go to almost any shop, as many people are paying with their mobile phone as they are with their bank account. So that means that the future of payments is a technology future, not a banking future. I think what we're talking about is the end of banking as we know it. Okay.
Right, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is again, I come back to what did I learn at TED? That the world is changing at an accelerating pace and we have no idea where it's going to end. But that technology is changing. They call it disruption.
Yeah.
This disruption is going on in every area. Now, banking is a classic place for disruption because banking has always been defined by lazy practices, what they call sticky deposits, John.
Yeah.
Right? So if you put your deposit in somewhere, the chances of you taking the money out is very, very, very slim.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. I haven't changed my bank account
Since the 1980s.
Yeah.
Or 1990s, right?
Yeah.
But that's all changing. So that's what Apple are doing. That's what Apple
So Apple is going to become
it's going to become a
the
bank.
new world order.
Well, now that's an
they
interesting question, because then the question is, and this is, I want to come back to this because I want to get onto something else in this podcast. But then you are right that the question then is, to what extent are a very small amount of tech companies hoovering up all the power?
Yeah.
So there is a dystopian future, which is the following, that our world, the world you and I were born into, is a world where the sovereign country was the most powerful institutional entity. So Ireland, Britain, Canada, America, right? There is a world in which the tech companies become more powerful than the sovereign country. And that's the world we're looking at. Yeah. And that's the world that's coming down the tracks. And then you have to ask about democracy and power plays, etc. And this is part of it, that the tech companies are becoming so big and so powerful and so involved in every area and so invasive of people's lives that there is a future which would suggest that a very small amount of largely American companies will dominate huge swathes of the economy. And the reason is the following. We're moving into a world where data is the currency. And the companies with data are the tech companies, because they know everything about us.
Yeah.
So this is your idea that, is there a possibility that a company like Apple becomes more important than the country? Yeah, absolutely.
That's just overwhelming and scary and kind of exciting. But speaking of savings, Mac,
yes,
let's just go back a little closer to home. This 12 billion surplus that we have, you know, there's all sorts of talk of what do we do with it and blah, blah, blah. And savings is one of them. So that brings us on to this. Talk to me about this. What's your view on what we should be doing and what kind of opportunities this presents?
Huge opportunity. Like, okay, let's go back again, right? When I was in Canada first, John, was in the late 80s, and I was a very, very bad dishwasher.
Yes.
But I did actually graduate to be a barman for a while, which was also another disastrous entree into a world I should always be at the other side of the bar.
Yes.
Okay, as a general rule.
A consumer
rather than a producer. But what I was intrigued back then, right, was that Ireland had no money. Okay,
yes.
We were a country with no money, right?
I remember that well. I had no money.
None of us had money, right?
Yeah.
We had, think about it, we had a massive, massive budget deficit every year. Money was flowing out of the country in dirt tax. Do you remember there was bogus bank accounts all over? Irish people pretending they were foreigners with bank accounts to avoid a thing called dirt tax, right? Yeah. We had a current account deficit, an enormous current account deficit, which meant that what we were trying to do was borrow just to stay in the same place. Because we had a current account deficit, interest rates are extremely high. Because interest rates were extremely high, the world always thought that the Irish currency was about to devalue because you couldn't sustain growth at those rates of interest. So the currency was always coming under pressure. Okay. So it was as if one bad thing after another happened, right? Now, I remember studying economics in the 80s, and studying economics in the 80s was like playing a bad joke on yourself. Like, can you imagine? It was like a North Korean studying democracy, right? Or, a Cuban studying accountancy or something. So I was in Trinity in the 80s, right? The economy was paralyzed by a lack of money. Yet we would go in to lectures, right? And we would be told by these professors who kind of looked at us with a straight face and talks about graphs and charts and everything in a kind of a never land where everything was wrong. So it was like telling a bad joke on yourself. Like I would go out and say, in the laboratory, there is an economy that works and we know how to use it. We're looking in the textbooks, but we come back out into this place. So, of course, what we did was we all emigrated, right? We went to Canada to get some of the money the Canadians had, right? So I was always intrigued when I went to Canada. I just thought, okay, these people aren't any cleverer than us. I remember they had very good teeth, though. They had very good teeth.
And coiffed hair.
They had very, very coiffed hair, but they had very, very, very expensive orthodontic bills. It was very clear to me. Lovely teeth, these people, right? But apart from having nice teeth...
But that was a key feature in Ireland at the time, just bad teeth.
Yes, yeah. Somebody used to refer to friends of mine in Russia as having communist teeth, right?
Yeah.
It was like a graveyard, right? But anyway, let's go back. So we had no money.
A graveyard.
It's true, actually. A graveyard in your beak, right? But now, for example, so we had no money, right? And the Canadians had lots of money. So we went to Canada to get money. So basically, in effect, Ireland exported its people cheaply and imported other people's money expensively.
Right.
That's how to describe Ireland in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, right? Now we've a strange situation where Ireland has not only a budget surplus of 12 billion, that's the tip of the iceberg. What's much more interesting is what's actually happening to savings in this country. Irish people have just under 200 billion euros on deposit. Okay? That is 100 billion more than was the case in 2010. So in the period of 12 years, Irish people have saved an extra 100 billion. If you look at the household, now we're going to get into just the national accounts. If you look at the household accounts in Ireland, what we see is that this last year, so 2022, right, Irish people will have saved 21 billion more than we invested. So we have saved an extra 21. So you add the local people savings of 21 billion to the government saving of 12, you get 33 billion of savings in this country.
That's just sitting there.
That's just sitting there. Right. Now listen to that. So this is phenomenal.
Right.
This means, remember we used to talk about the current account deficit, right?
Yeah.
We have a current account surplus of 15% of GDP now. That means we are saving so much money, right? Now this should be something that economists talk about, right? Because having this much money idle is as weird as having not enough money at all.
Right.
But economists, because they've got an obsession with prudence, and I want to talk about if we have a deficit, right, and if there are budget deficits and if there's problems with this, economists will write papers and academics will write papers, right? But if we have surplus, they don't write at all, as if it's not a problem.
Right.
It's a huge problem, you know. So after the 2008 crisis...
In what way?
Okay, so the problem is that what I'm talking about is that economists tend to fetishize the saver. They elevate prudence as being the virtue. The most virtuous characteristic a person can have is prudence. Yeah. Is the saver. And the saver is elevated. This is sort of an intellectual default position, right? But the problem with prudence is prudence doesn't generate anything. Yeah. You know, if you decide that we are going to save, so for example, right now, many economists are saying, oh, just put that away for a rainy day.
But is that a hangover from, you're saying that we didn't have any money in the 80s? And so now that you have a little bit of money, for God's sake, got to hold on to that.
It's an intellectual and moral argument. So let's actually look at what's going on here, right? It is a morality idea that the saver is on a slightly higher moral plane than the spender. The spender is degenerate. The spender is somebody who's out for having a good time. The saver, on the other hand, it's a very, very Calvinistic idea. Yes. Right? Yeah. But the problem with the saver is if you save money, what you're essentially doing, right? If a whole nation is saving money, you're basically taking money, which is the most magical element in the world. Money is an amazing idea. It's an amazing energy. It's what animates human innovation. It's what makes us get out of bed in the morning. It's what finances all great things. Right. And what we're saying is, let's just put it in the ground and bury it for the next generation. Yeah. And it's a sanctimoniousness, right? And Ireland does sanctimoniousness very well. It's a very sanctimoniousness. Well indeed. Yeah. I am sanctimoniously putting savings away. Right? Yeah. Now, what I'm saying is people who argue for savings and say that this is a good thing are people who don't understand what money is. They actually look at the world through balance sheets. This is like second-rate accountancy, not economics, right? Second-rate accountancy is obsessed by balance sheet balancing, right? So they think that money is a scorecard at the end of a balance sheet, it's either plus or minus.
Yeah, yeah.
But that actually takes away the essential element of money, which I'm going to put it very, very succinctly is money gives humans the horn.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And by that I mean it makes us excited.
Yeah.
And it's an unbelievably profound substance, right? It's an idea. It's a mental idea, money, right? And economists don't understand money, which is why they usually have bad suits and bad shoes.
Now, steady on, Mike.
No, but I'm just in general, you know.
You don't dress that bad.
No, I know. But I'm just saying, John, money is an exciting idea. When I went to Canada as a kid, the reason I went was because we had no money.
Yeah.
The reason Canada was working is they had loads of money.
Yeah, it's the reason I went to London.
And they were investing and they were creating opportunity and they were creating a modern economy. And they were making mistakes and yes, they had, problems every now and then. But when you lived in Canada, when you experienced a society that understood money, you understood that they got the excitement of this element.
Yeah.
Now, what I have done, maybe since then, but as I've grown older, I've begun to see money much more as this exciting, almost elemental force in people's lives. When you have it, you can achieve almost anything. When you don't have it, you can't achieve anything. We now have it, and we're putting it in the ground.
Yes.
Like we have it. It can fix things. It can animate human imagination. It can change the world. And what we're advising ourselves is, oh my God, now we have it, just save it. Now, what does saving do? If the savings in the banking system are used straight away by entrepreneurs to go and finance great things, that's fine. But that's not happening. The money's stuck in the banking system.
So it's like hoarding of property. When you hoard something, no one else can use it.
Exactly.
So if you're hoarding 12 billion or whatever it is, no one else can use it.
So let's look at the essential thing. Money, I've always said, is like language. The more it's used, the more worthwhile it is, right? So a language like English is very, very useful because we can all communicate in it, right?
Yeah.
If you were to decide to speak Esperanto, for example,
it
may well look and sound elegant, but you can't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So just think about hoarding money, right? We have to accept now that our economy and our society is an economy and society that is generating enormous amounts of surpluses, and that this is a medium-term trend. This isn't just a one-off, right?
Yeah.
If it was a one-off, the government would have this massive surplus, but the population will have a massive deficit.
Yes, yeah.
But that's not happening. The population has a massive surplus too. And then we say, could you imagine using 12 billion of the government's money? You could fix all childcare and give it away free.
Yes.
Free, right? Now everybody says, oh, well, we don't have the workers, right? Import the workers. Have a plan, say we have the money. All these things that we could have done in the 80s, 90s, we didn't do because we had no money. Now we have lots of money and we're still not doing the things because we're afraid of inflation or we're afraid of a current account problem. We're afraid of this is all failure of imagination. And what basically happens is the veil, the sanctimonious veil of savings is thrown up by economists in order for us not to think difficult questions and put on our hard thinking cap and say, what are we going to do with this money?
Yeah.
Because the money isn't just something that is neutral and just survived. The money is a reflection of our own biases. And we have a country with a housing problem.
Yeah.
We have a country with an infrastructure problem, right? We have a country with a childcare problem. These are just infrastructural issues.
Yeah.
We have a country with an innovation problem. We're not innovating enough. We have a country with an entrepreneurial problem. We're not giving entrepreneurs enough cash. I mean, so many good ideas are not being executed in Ireland because of a lack of money. And yet the economy is coming down with money. So the question is then, what bias do we have that allows us to think that it's a totally logical thing to do to put this money in a sack and bury it in the ground?
So, okay, let's talk about the bias and the psychology of this saving after this.
Great.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is this a political problem? Is it an economic problem? Or is it something that, like you mentioned about Calvinism before and our experience through the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, of not having money, that it's that kind of mentality of, well, it's like a safety blanket.
Yeah.
As distorted a view that is.
Maybe it could be. I just think we're using the future to allow us to escape from making hard decisions in the present.
Right.
And we're saying, oh, well, we're going to save money for the future, right? The problem is, as Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, you only have one lifetime here, okay? And it strikes me that we are now in an economy that is generating enormous surpluses as a fact.
Yeah.
This isn't a cyclical, unusual situation. This is now the fact of the Irish economy, right? So the question then for why are we generating surpluses? Because we're not generating the investment opportunities to actually suck up that money. Why are we not creating the investment opportunities? Because as you say, we've got some sort of bias towards it.
Yeah.
But I mean, the problem is that prudence never created one job. Prudence never created one innovation. Prudence never created one new product. Prudence is elevated on some sort of moral basis. But when you actually look at it, what generates economic growth, what generates this extraordinary upward propulsion of humanity is risk. That's what does it.
Right.
It's actually innovating, tinkering around the margins, making things better, looking at, wow, we could use that, we could do this. And the substance that lubricates that process is money. And that's why money is essential. And a society that has been given the opportunity to say, we don't have a budget constraint, and says, well, isn't that awful? Let's create one in our heads. That's what we've done. We don't have a budget constraint. The economy is generating all this money, and we've decided we don't want to use it.
Okay, so how do we change this? How do we incentivize ourselves? How do we, there's a bit of kind of psychology that we need to go through to kind of change our whole mindset.
Yeah, there is. I mean, well, the first thing is so Keynes talked about a thing called the paradox of thrift, right? And I think it's a very interesting cyclical idea. And his basic idea was that, look, saving's great as long as not everybody is saving, right? He said the problem with saving is if you encourage everyone to save, well, who's going to spend? So if you think, right, so if nobody's spending, then you have no income. And saving comes from income. Income is the font of everything in economics, right? So if everyone's saving, his idea was there's a paradox of thrift. Saving is only good if you save and I don't.
Yeah.
But if we all save together, nobody's spending. And if nobody's spending, there's no income. And if there's no income, the economy stops. So that's the first thing.
Right.
That's in what I would call the cyclical view, macroeconomic view. But then there's something which is much, much deeper, which is the alchemy of money, which is the magic of money, which is the real power of money. Now, you see this in countries that don't have it, which was Ireland in the 80s. When you don't have money, you really know you don't have it.
Yeah.
And you have mass immigration, you have poverty, you have all these things that you want to achieve and you can't achieve it, right? When you have money, you have a very bizarre, you talk about psychology, John. The thing about money is money allows you to live in the future, right? No money requires and limits you to live in the present. So what you always find is that if you talk to upper middle class people, they're always talking about their plans. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
In 5 years' time, I'm going to do this. In 10 years' time, I'm going to do that, right? And in one part, you can be kind of cynical about it. But what it does is because they don't need money to pay their bills today, they can actually live in the future. And when you can live in the future, you can make plans, you can invest in yourself, you can do courses. And
if you have a big old pension and you can talk about what I'm going to do when I'm old.
Yeah, exactly. So you have no financial problems. But even if you talk, the difference between a poor person and a rich person is time horizons. That poverty obliterates the future. And I really feel this. So now we have a situation in Ireland where we don't have any financial compulsion to be poor.
Yeah.
We are now rich, right? But we are still saying to the millennial generation, a lot of people listen to this podcast, your childcare is going to cost you $2,000 a month. Or your home is going to cost you this. So rather than allow the millennials to live in the future, we're imposing the constraints of the present on them because we're pretending we're a poor country when we're a rich country.
Yes.
Look, just do the fucking back of the envelope maths. I mean, what, 12 billion, 12,000 million. And if you take the average house is going to cost like 280 grand or something like that, that means the state could actually provide about 45,000 houses with this year's surplus alone for free. For free. Think about it, right?
Yeah.
And then they say, oh yeah, but our constraint is workers. Well, then import the workers.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Go out, do a shout out and say, we need 100,000 workers. And yes, your conditions won't be absolutely fine, but we're going to build, temporary accommodation for you to build everything. But in part of that building, we're going to build houses for you too.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Just do it. Do it. I mean, think about it. This is a country that in 1842 or 43 had about 8 million people here.
Yeah.
There was 12 million people in Britain. There are now 60 million people in Britain. And there's less than 8 million people here. Think about it. There is no fucking capacity constraint here. None. Except in our minds, we are intellectually constrained. And economics is part of the problem. Because what it's done is rather than take the courageous decisions, the imaginative decisions, the let's go for it, and we now have the money decisions, we are rich people thinking like poor people, right? And that's what Ireland has to change. We are now a rich country. We're a country of savers thinking that somebody's going to take the money off us. Nobody's going to come and take your money off you. You don't need to put it in the ground and bury it. It's there. Money is a magic and we should use it. By the way, John, before we go, tickets for the Dalkey Book Festival, 15th to 18th of June, are on sale now.
And
Dalkey,
it's a humdinger of a lineup.
Really,
better
really
than TED.
Look, now, John, do you know I've been to TED?
Oh, really?
Really?
Tedster?
Tedster. Hey, Ted. I was actually Father Ted. Talk to you next week.